Welcome to The Art of Discernment, a podcast where professors from across the Masters University discuss current events and higher education from a biblical worldview.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Art of Discernment. This is Dr. Bob Dickson, and with me is Mason Nesbitt, our Director of Communication here at the Masters University. And today we're doing things just a little differently, right, Mason?
We are, Bob.
Today, I'm in the guest's chair, and Mason is sitting in my customary chair as host, and we're going to be talking to me about a new course I'm teaching on campus.
Yeah, Bob, as we were thinking about, okay, what guests do we want to line up for season 2 of The Art of Discernment? What professors do we want to have on the show who are going to be able to talk to things that are relevant and current? And I couldn't think of anybody better to address this topic. And so then we thought, okay, how are we going to make this work? And I had to, step in. I'm going to interview you.
Yeah, that's right, Mason. And I'm excited to do it. It's going to be fun.
So the topic we're going to address today, Bob, is a class that you're teaching on campus for the first time this fall. It's called News Media Literacy. But before we get into that, I just want to, you're always good about laying out the credentials of everybody else we have on this show. So I've got to do you justice here.
Ah, okay.
You are the chair of the communication department at the Masters University. You hold a bachelor's degree from UC Santa Barbara, a master's degree from Northeastern Oklahoma State University, and a doctorate from the University of Southern California. Did I get it all right?
You did get it right. Thank you.
While all that is very important, I think what maybe speaks to partly why you're on today talking about what you're going to be talking about today is the fact that over the years you've written for magazines, TV, radio, a newspaper, the web, and you've been published in several books. So when it comes to what we're going to talk about today, you've been there and done that.
That's right. That's what's perhaps most pertinent to the issue and topic of news media literacy. Absolutely.
So before we get too far down the tracks here, what is news media literacy? What are we talking about?
Yeah, news media literacy is a skill, an acquired skill, I hope, an acquired skill of being able to discern truth from error in the news that's reported and the information that we get from wherever we get our information. So whether that's television or on the web or social media on our phones, we get information, news coming to us all the time. It purports to be factual, but as we all know, it's always slanted one way or the other, and that leads to a lot of confusion. So it is critical that we understand how to spot that and then be able to figure out truth from error in these scenarios. So that's the definition of it. That's the textbook definition of it, I guess.
So why I guess then did you feel like it was important to teach this class now? This is the first semester that you're teaching it at Masters. Why was it important to start this class now?
I think we can all relate, especially in the last year to 2 years, with the reality that as a society, we can't agree. Too often, we can't agree on a set of facts. Because of that, we have a society that's divided, and not just a little divided. Like a little division is fine because it leads to healthy debate and compromise, and I think society moves forward. But we're not even having healthy debates anymore because, like I said, we just don't agree on a basis for debate. The sets of facts that one side holds are completely different and even opposite from the sets of facts that the other side holds. And the reason for that is the information we're getting. Half of the country doesn't trust half of it. The other half of the country doesn't trust the other half. And so here we are. And the information that we get through news, that's what we use to base every important decision, almost every important decision that we make. It's how we decide how we're going to vote. It's how we decide where we're going to live. Are we going to buy it? Are we going to rent? It's how we make decisions, certainly about our health. Are we going to take a shot, not take a shot? How are we going to feel about mandates, not mandates? That comes from the information that we get, and that determines what we think about these issues. And we have complete lack of faith in the information. And so when I think about students in my course, it's no different and maybe even more critical than for anybody listening to this podcast. It'd be nice if they could feel confident about the decisions they made, to be able to look at a piece of news and say, yeah, I don't think I can trust that. I need to verify that. Or I do trust that, but maybe I shouldn't trust that. Let me verify it. And be confident moving forward with the decisions they're making because they've been able to spot the lies.
Now, you talked about half the country doesn't believe half the news they read, and the other half of the country doesn't believe the other half of the news that they read. Has it always been that way, or have things gotten considerably worse in recent years?
I'm really glad you asked that question because this comes up a lot. You hear people say, well, back when I was young, the news was the news and you could trust the news and it was just the facts, ma'am, and that's what you got. And you know what? There are no good old days when it comes to journalism. And there are better old days, I guess, but no good old days. I mean, if you go all the way back to the colonial era here in this country, the United States, when newspapers were relatively new, print media was almost brand new. You have newspapers that were called the partisan press. Yet half the newspapers were arguing the loyalist perspective and the other half were arguing the colonial perspective for or against the Revolutionary War. And it's always been that way. Newspapers exist to become a forum for debate. So you're always going to have differing opinions presented. But it's much worse now because I hate to just keep repeating myself on this, but really, if you can agree on a set of facts, if you can agree that the sky is blue, at least from our perspective, the sky is blue, right? From there, you can debate whether or not the blueness of the sky affects the color of the ocean and makes it more blue or less blue, but you can at least agree that the sky is blue. But if you can't even agree that the sky is blue, you can't have that debate. And so that's where we are. And so it has gotten worse, considerably worse in just the last 10 years, I'd say, maybe 20.
So Bob, what's a way that, whether it's coming from one side or from the other, that a news organization might go about slanting a particular story?
Sure. There are too many ways, sadly, but I've identified, at least for this course, 12. I call them the dirty dozen, because it's fun to call them the dirty dozen. But if our readers are interested, I'll give the whole course on the podcast right here. But short of that, no, I'll just list them. Obviously, there's just outright lies and propaganda. We know this isn't true, but we're going to put it out there. Or we are going to put this out there for the purpose of manipulating somebody. You got content, radio silence versus a media blitz on a particular issue is another way that stories in the news can get slanted. You just choose not to cover something, i.e. the Hunter Biden laptop, the story just goes away. You choose to focus heavily on something, it stays in the spotlight. You have, of course, misleading headlines. Think of those as kind of clickbait headlines is another way. Poorly sourced stories. Think of the stories that came out in the Atlantic during the election cycle, this last election, a couple of pretty significant stories that were based on anonymous sources, for example. And you're an old journalist like me, that you can't do that. Like, you have to get a source somewhere on the record. And if you can't, then you don't have a story. Well, that's component of journalistic ethics is out the window. You have advocacy and activist journalism, where journalists aren't even trying to be objective. They are coming at a story with a preconceived idea and even a hope for what the story is going to be, and they search for that. And if they don't find it, they don't cover it. So that's a big one. Citizen journalism, where citizens are just through Twitter, they're becoming journalists and people are taking them at their word, but, knocking the common man or anything, but you really can't expect that person to have gone through a course in journalistic ethics. So they're going to say what they say. In the era of social media, that has as much capacity to go around the world as someone with a blue check mark. So that's a problem. Censorship, I think we've all felt that in the last year or so, where you hear that one side of an issue just is not being allowed to be considered at all. And that's a problem, a big problem. Another one is the manipulation of statistics or misrepresentation of a study. A study was recently done that showed, and fill in the blank. And the way you handle those statistics can be right or wrong. And just a couple more here. The manipulation of vocabulary. I have an extra credit assignment in my class where if the students buy or procure in some manner a dictionary that's published prior to 1990, I'll give them points. And any of my former students who are listening to this are probably falling out of their chairs because I don't do extra credit. I never have, and I don't believe in extra credit. But I believe more, though, in the importance of owning an old dictionary and also an old encyclopedia so that you can say, all right, here's a fixed history of the definitions of these words, and it's in print, so it can't be changed overnight. For example, do you call something a protest or do you call it a riot? Or do you call it an insurrection? What word you use changes the perspective on it. Another one is just incomplete or false context. That's kind of an obvious one, but you take a snippet of somebody's speech out of context and you make that a 15-second video, you throw it up on social media, and everybody thinks the guy who said it is a horrible racist. Is he or isn't he? Well, based on that one clip, absolutely. But what was the context? If you actually pull the lens out and see the whole context, oh, actually, that's not what was said. We've seen that in the past year. Another one is logical fallacies. This is the old English comp teacher in me, the either or fallacy. It's you're for this policy or you're a horrible racist or I'll just leave it at that. But that gets used. The straw man, demanding proof of cause. the personal attacks. There are many more, but logical fallacies get thrown out. And unfortunately, we have a lot of readers and news consumers that can't spot those logical fallacies. And so they just go with it. They believe it. And then there's number 12. I should have mentioned before I even started this list that I'm teaching them in this class in ascending order from easiest to spot to hardest and most challenging to find. And the 12th one is the most difficult one. And it has nothing to do with the news agencies at all. And it has everything to do with us as consumers, and that is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is just a fancy term for, hey, you believe it because you want to believe it. When you read something that confirms an ideology that you already hold, you're not going to question it. You're going to go, cool, yeah, that's more evidence on my side. Let me bookmark this tweet. I'm good to go. And when you read something that doesn't confirm what you believe, you tend to reject it out of hand without actually considering it. Both sides are bad. Both sides eliminate debate altogether. And that one requires a great deal of reflection and is the most difficult because it comes from the inside. It's hard to realize that you're part of the problem yourself. And so we work our way up to that 12th one end of the semester. So those are the 12 that I'm covering in class. There are more, obviously, but those are the 12 we're covering.
Those are great, Bob. And so as our listeners are out there, okay, now they're aware of these 12 things. What then, I guess, are some principles that they can apply that will help them recognize and respond to these things you just gave us?
Well, listeners might not like it, but here's the answer. You have to be willing to have a look at what the other side of the aisle is saying about the same issue. I know you don't want to. I don't like to do it either. I really would rather just stay in my foxhole and rocks into the other foxhole like everybody else, but that's not getting us anywhere. What we need to do, all of us, and I include myself in this, is to say, okay, this is what, for example, this is what Fox News is saying about this issue. Let me go take a look at what CNN is saying about it. And let me see if there's any differences. And if they're the same, there's a better chance that it's accurate. But you and I both know that it's probably not going to be the same, even on those two. And those two, as far apart as they can seem, are closer than if I were to say Fox News and Politico, or CNN and Newsmax, or One American News, and MSNBC. Like we're now getting farther and farther apart. And it's pretty remarkable. I showed students screenshots of the day that the bomb go off in Kabul and 13 servicemen and women were American servicemen and women were killed and way too many civilians. And I went to every one of those sites that I just mentioned and I screenshotted them all because I knew they would all show something different. It was beyond remarkable. It was just shocking, the difference. You had on Fox, you had a picture of Joe Biden kind of looking like he's fumbling around at the microphone and it says presidency in crisis. That's pretty much on par with what you would expect from Fox. And on CNN, it has a picture of Biden at a microphone looking defiant, and it says Biden promises retribution. So one's got one looking like the bumbling fool, one's got one looking like the hero, or at least the promising avenger. But then as you go further left and further right, they just start to divert. And I won't give you them all, but all the way to the farthest left, like Politico, didn't even acknowledge that it happened. Like they had some, or barely acknowledged that happened. They had some feature on the cover about someone who escaped the influence of Donald Trump is now telling his story like he's a refugee. And then along in the side column was a little blurb about, this happened in Afghanistan. And then One American News had a hero shot of Donald Trump, and it says Trump sends his condolences to the family. And all due respect, I mean, that's nice, everything, but that's not really newsworthy at that moment. So, and I showed this to the class, and their jaws just dropped. I said, how can we not all agree that this happened? And in that moment, it's not political; it's a tragedy. But even before we get into the 5 W's of what actually happened, the headlines were editorializing it. So the only way to safeguard ourselves from it is to recognize that. If that's the only one you're going to, you have to understand that it is in its own silo, that there's 5, 10, 12 other ones that are saying something else. So go look at all 12. Some you can dismiss out of hand. The far right and far left, you can go ahead and toss those. As you get closer to the middle, though, pay attention to what's the same and what's different. And that's just the start of it. It's hard. It takes effort. And that's why nobody really wants to do it, because it's exhausting, In addition to the fact that nobody really wants to, that confirmation bias thing I was talking about, nobody really wants to go, someone who's on the far right doesn't want to go hanging out in Politico very long, and vice versa. But the onus for this falls on the consumer. We can't leave it to the news agencies to solve this thing for us. I mentioned this to class on our third meeting. I wrote on the board, I said, 2 principles you need to understand. Number 1, news is a business. And despite what their mission statement is, their number 1 goal is to make money for their shareholders. That is their job. If they're not doing that, CEOs get fired. And then you couple that with number 2, total depravity, just the depravity, sin nature, depravity of mankind. You put those 2 in a cauldron, stir them up, and whatever comes out isn't good. So even the most well-intentioned news agency, maybe spend a little more time to make sure you get something right, or get this thing out there in a hurry so you get all the views because the views equal money. They're going to choose the latter because it makes money. And if you understand those 2 things, you realize it's up to us as consumers to do the work that they won't do for us.
So you've been teaching this class on campus now for several weeks. What has been the response of the students? Is this something that they're interested in? Is this something that they're thinking about already, as they come onto campus?
I wondered about that. I lost a little sleep over that, actually, this class, because it's a required course in the major. Anybody who is a communication major that isn't a cinema and digital arts major has to take this course. So whenever you teach a course that's required, you really do wonder, like, okay, the students are in here. How engaged are they going to be? Because they have to be here. But the answer to that question is they've been very engaged, and I've been really encouraged by that. When I say that we as a society are suffering from this malady in our culture, it's not just this society and this kind of broad, vague thing. The students in my classes are suffering because of this. And I'll use, I think, the example that is most applicable, and that is the COVID-19, the pandemic and the vaccines and everything to do with all of that, because nobody can choose to ignore that one. We can say, I don't really want to talk about presidential elections and politics and what's going on in the Middle East. It's just not my thing. I'm going to put my head in the sand. And you kind of have the luxury of that when you're a college student. I did. I didn't think much about any of those things at that point. But this one doesn't matter. It's on everybody's mind. And just the other day in class, I took a little time and we were kind of running through some of these 12 and really just the first one. Because COVID-19, the pandemic, is so pertinent to everybody, that's becoming sort of the canvas on which this whole class, all these 12 is sort of playing out. So I asked the class, I said, hey, how are you guys interacting with the news and with regard to COVID-19 and the choices that you have to make and your families are making? And I'm just curious, anybody want to share? And I really didn't know if I was going to, whenever you ask a class to share, you don't know, you better have something backup because they might not share at all. And I thought we'd spend 10 minutes and we went all the way to the end of class. It was, 45 minutes. And I said, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Like there were 3 or 4 hands up all the time. Like it's one of those situations where you say, okay, all right, John, you're next. And Niobe, you go after that. And Gabe, you're after that. And then it was like that. And the reason was that they've been dying to talk about this, because they're struggling trying to figure out what to do. Their families are struggling to know. Different people in their family are thinking different things. And it's right where they live. And they don't know. Some of them are scared. Some of them aren't scared at all. Some of them are just angry. All of them are confused to some degree. And none of us knows where to look to answer this particular set of questions. And I've always very convicted that this is important, that we need to do this. But I got to tell you, sitting there and engaging with those young men and women about this, and the stories that came out and the emotion involved in it and the concern for everybody in that room, for each other in that room, it just strengthened my conviction. Like, we need this as a society, but these young men and women need it. Sure, so that when they graduate, they can be productive members of society, but they need it today so they can make competent and confident decisions about something that is, for some people, life and death. Like, it really matters. So it's going really well. I feel the weight of the responsibility of this course because I feel it's so important, and I want to make sure that I dispense my responsibility to these young men and women as well as I can. One challenge that I've faced is, I told them the first day, I said, if at any point in this class you can tell what my political affiliations are, then I'm not doing my job right. Now, you can make some assumptions. They might be right, they might be wrong. But I don't want to be part of the problem. Like, I want to just present the material objectively and let's look at it. Because, there's that dynamic. I want to make sure I give the teacher what he wants. Like, there isn't anything I want in terms of content from them. What I want is for them to be thinking critically about whatever we're talking about. Whether I agree or disagree with their conclusion, they'll never know. I'll never tell them. It doesn't matter. I just want to know that they can give an answer for it. Like, okay, we've done our research. I mean, that's the way the whole class unfolds is every week they're with a small group and they're going to come up and give examples of one of these dozen. We're going to work our way through 1 week at a time. Anyway, I'm excited about where it's going. It's hard to believe that this is already my favorite class because I love all my classes. And I feel like I say this about all my classes. What's your favorite class? My favorite class is the class I'm teaching right now. It's today, in this moment. That's always kind of my answer. But this class is special to me right now. It was the product of the dissertation I wrote. It was a thing that I feel this very strongly in my bones that we can't keep going this way as a society. We just can't. As Christians, we can't, silo up and just hunker down and say whoever doesn't believe what I believe or feel what I feel politically is the enemy. How does that work for us as evangelists in the world? It doesn't. Right there, you make your mission field your enemy, and they're no longer your mission field. So, we are supposed to be peacemakers. Now, you can't bring peace to every situation, but we of all people should be willing to reach across the aisle, as it were, and say, okay, help me understand your position. Politically, I'm talking about here. Help me understand what set of facts you have that you've landed on this conclusion politically. I really do want to understand. And be willing, and I told my students, be willing to have your mind changed on political things, not spiritual things. Be willing to have your mind changed. That's growth. That's how you grow. But also be willing to exchange your ideas with them and hope that they'll be willing and will meet you halfway. If we can't do that as a culture, we're doomed. I could have said that 2 years ago and people go, oh, that's hyperbole. I don't even need to say it anymore. We know it. It's serious. One other thing I'll just mention, I told my class this recently. I said an unstated objective in the class, but I'll share it with you. I said the class, I want you guys to become skeptical, but I don't want you to become cynical. There's a difference. Becoming skeptical is what we should be. We're commanded to be skeptical, test things.
Discerning.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're calling this thing. Be discerning. Don't be open-minded in the way that you hear that. That's actually not, you don't just let everything in and just, you guard your mind from things. Be skeptical, but don't let yourself become cynical, because cynical equates hard-hearted. Cynical is, I give up. Cynical is, well, there's no point. We can't become cynical. We have to understand that this is still the Lord's world, and so, we may not understand why everything's happening the way it is, but it's all happening by divine design and providence, whether we can understand it or not. And we need to remember that, because on the one hand, I'm telling students, you got to dive in and look at all these news sources so that you can discern what's really going on. But if you spend too much time there, and that's where your focus is, you will despair. You will feel the weight of that, and you'll just feel like giving up. It's a cliche, you got to keep the main thing, but the main thing are the spiritual things. And what do we really know about the world there, and who really controls this world, and where is it really going? And understand where your eternal destination lies, and don't despair, but don't stick your head in the sand either. So anyway, those are my convictions for this course.
Well, Bob, I'm so glad that you're teaching this class, and I wish that I could have taken this when I was in college. That would have been fantastic, but I'm glad that you're teaching that now, and I'll be really interested to hear another update as this fall continues.
You're welcome to drop in anytime. We're old buddies. I'll save a seat for you.
I appreciate that, Bob. I appreciate that. And I've always wanted to close out the Art of Discernment, so if it's all right with you, I'll shut it down.
Take it away.
So it's been another episode of the Art of Discernment. We hope you'll check in as we continue to have professors on to talk about current events and relevant topics. Thanks again, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Discernment. For more information on the Masters University, visit masters.edu. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll see you next time.